This meeting is for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Madeline H will be sharing on steps 4 and 10 for 50 minutes. This is Madeline's second time speaking at the Broken Elevator, and we are absolutely delighted to have her back with us. Please help me give a warm welcome to Madeline H from Sacramento, California. Her home group is the Jaywalkers. Over to you, Madeline.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date of January 23rd, 2019. And for that, I can take absolutely no credit whatsoever. Because of myself, I'm restless, irritable, and discontented. And that's what it says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is really, like the main thing that I struggle with. And so I am going to talk today about steps 4 and 10, because I think that they're buddies, they're little friends, they want to go with each other. And one of the reasons that I want to talk about them together is because I believe that when we look at those pages in How It Works that describes the 4th step, it's telling us how to write our 4-step inventory, which is obviously, mostly what it's for, but it's also describing these spiritual principles that we're going to take forward with us. And how, the solutions to these issues that we're taking the inventory on. And then I think that 10 is the continuation of how we continue to take inventory of how well we're practicing those principles in our daily lives. So for me, I really like how they go together, not just as the steps on inventory, but also about the steps on how we are going to find the solution to, the causes and conditions of why we got loaded to the degree that we did. And so I am going to start by giving a quick recap of steps 1, 2, and 3, because I do not think it's really possible to talk about steps 4 or any other step until you talk about those. And then the other reason that I'm going to start by talking about them is because I am only sober today because somebody described what alcoholism was. And I had no idea what the disease of alcoholism was until somebody else described it. And so for me, it's not fair for me to come into a meeting without describing what that is, in case someone in here also doesn't know and may not be able to stay sober without that information. So, I got loaded, and I loved it. That's really something that's important to say. I loved getting loaded. If you're new in here, we are not a group of people who are anti, getting loaded. Problem is that I loved it so much that I ended up in the situation that I did. So if you're in here and you're new and you're still thinking I love doing that, how am I going to live without it? We're a community of people who understand that feeling. And so, my story is basically that I feel very uncomfortable all the time. And I always have. From a very young age, I was very, very uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable because of the way that I think. So the way that I think, the basic way that I can describe it is I think so much about what I want, how I feel, and what other people think about me that I have a hard time functioning in the world because I'm constantly assessing my own behavior and other people's behavior in this very odd, calculus of what do they think of me? How did they react to what I just did? Would they react better if I did this? And this is from a very, very young age. And so I was just very uncomfortable moving through life. And the first way that I tried to cope with that thinking and feeling was that I would tense my muscles really hard to try to calm down. And I noticed that if I tensed certain muscles, it kind of felt good. I liked how that felt. I liked the effect produced by tensing those muscles. And so I did that so much that to this day, I have an entire musculatory system in my body that does not function properly. So my muscles are constantly contracting, that they've become spastic and hypertonic, and they just don't relax the way that they need to. So I had this chronic pain as well as this very weird way of thinking from a young age. And it all kind of centered from the same place. So I was very uncomfortable my whole life. So when I got loaded and that was removed and I didn't feel that way anymore, I was oh, yeah, this is happening. This is going to happen in a big way. I'm not going back to how that felt before. And so I just kind of went crazy with it. So that's just the important background to know about who I am. And then I'm just going to jump right into what step 1 is really about for me. So we talk about admitting we were powerless over alcohol. And I don't know if anybody in here well, I know you guys, some people do. The definition of alcoholism for me is these three components. The first is that when I take a substance into my system, I experience an allergic reaction where I can't stop. So once I start, I can't stop. I can't shut down the reaction to it just because I don't want to get loaded anymore. And I know that like that definitely sounds like powerlessness, but it's only one form of powerlessness, because for me, the real thing that makes me powerless over alcohol is what happens to me when I'm completely sober. That's the second component of alcoholism, where when I get completely stone cold sober, something in my head tells me that I need to pick it back up again. And I don't have a defense against that thought. And here's what I thought sobriety was about. I thought sobriety was about, before I came into the rooms, I thought it was about, I would have a thought that said, I really want to get loaded. And I would like push it away with all of like my strength and willpower. Like I would just push it away. And I heard people say this thing about like one day at a time. And I was like, oh my God, I guess people are just pushing those thoughts away one day at a time. I was like, this is the most uncomfortable thing in the world. But for me, I got loaded to the extent where I ended up continuously being covered in my own excrement and throw up and in deep psychosis. And so like I couldn't go on, but I was like, this is a very uncomfortable way to live. So I wasn't really like happy about it, but I was like, okay, I'll push the thoughts away. But then I had a thought that I couldn't push away. And I got loaded again with every intention of remaining sober. And so when they talked to me about this mental obsession, I was like, yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about. And that's the true form of powerlessness. So when I say I'm powerless over alcohol, what I'm saying is that right now, today, with almost 5 years of sobriety, I continue to be powerless over alcohol. I don't wake up and choose not to get loaded. I wake up and choose to do a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the result of that choice is that I don't get loaded. But it's not a choice that I have. And that's what it means to be powerless over alcohol. And then they were talking about admitting that my life was unmanageable. Now, I personally have never had a manageable life. So for me, it wasn't that it had become unmanageable. I only knew unmanageability, because the question is not, do you live under a bridge? It's, can you manage your thought life? Can I manage my reactions to things? Could I manage the way that I thought about things? And I sure couldn't. Like I hadn't been able to do that since I was 3. Because like I just described, my way of managing something is by tensing my muscles so hard that they break. So like there's just no manageability in the way that I reacted to situations and reacted to my life. So powerless over alcohol, life is unmanageable, like absolutely. And then they were talking about coming to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Now I have to decide real quick whether I'm going to go into a very odd part of my story. It takes a long time to explain, so I'm just going to give like a very short recap of it. But basically, I believed, I founded a religion when I was 15. And because that's the degree to which like I trust my own thinking, and I think that like I know the right way to do things, because I had this very delusional and insane thought that I was Aphrodite's chosen mortal on this earth, and it was my divine mission to usher in a revolution of sexual healing. Now, I know today how insane that sounds. Please chuckle. Like it's hilarious. Like it's very funny that I thought that. But I really did. Like I thought that down to my core, because all I know is how to strive for 4 things. And that's power, control, attention, and affection. Like that's all I know is like how to get the most of those 4 things at all times. And so I thought that I had come up with like a pretty good way to get all 4 of those things. And that included like living this life where basically I had other people worship me. So when I came into the program, it was not a question of, do I believe in a higher power? Because I was like, yeah, absolutely. I believe in a higher power. Like no problem there. No question, I believe in a higher power. So I didn't have to come to believe in a power greater than myself. But what was most important for me was that I came to believe that I was not this higher power, that I took the faith out of myself rather than what I put it in. And so I know that the higher power thing can be like a big barrier to a lot of people coming into this program. And in the group that I got sober with, things were made very simple. It was this question of, do you believe that you are literally the highest being in the universe, like the most powerful being in the universe? Because if you don't believe that, by definition, you believe there are powers greater than yourself. And for me, the attention was all focused on like the work, like what I was going to do to build a relationship with this power. And then I was placed on a third step, because you don't have to believe, you don't have to know what your conception of a power greater than yourself is to turn your will and your life over to it. And I know that that can sound very scary, but it's true. You do not need to know what you're turning your will and your life over to be able to turn your will and your life over. Because I was given very concrete direction for how I was going to do that. And what's most important for me to understand is that I'm not God. And for me, when I was confronted with this idea of whether I really did believe I was God, I was very offended, because I was like, oh, I'm this pious woman. Like, I would never do that. You know, like me and my higher power were like this. I would never. But I had to take a look at something different, where when I come into a situation, if it's not the way that I want it to be or believe it should be, I believe it is my duty, right, and responsibility to control and manipulate it until it is the way that I want it to be. Because fundamentally, what I suffer from is this deep delusion and entitlement to my own way of thinking. I think that my ideas are right and they're the best, and I trust them and I operate off of them. And that's the biggest problem with how I live life. And so they pointed out some very simple things to me, like, has that worked out for you so far? Like, where has that gotten you? And my answer to that was very simple, because I was literally living in an adult daycare facility where they were taking my phone and telling me when I had to wake up and when to go to bed. So it's like, that's where it lands me. Me living off my own ideas lands me just in that one place. So the third step is this invitation to getting on board with my higher power's will. Because here's another spoiler alert if you're new. Higher power's will, it's happening with or without me. They do not need my permission. They do not need me on board. So it's this question of, am I going to get on board with my higher power's will, or am I going to get dragged by it? And Alcoholics Anonymous is the invitation to get on board with my higher power's will. And so, like I said, there was this concrete direction for what I was going to do to turn my will and my life over. So my will is everything that happens in my head, and my life is everything that I actually do. So to turn my will over, because as I've described, my thinking is the problem. My thinking tells me that I'm a high priestess of Aphrodite. My thinking tells me that I should leave the treatment facility that I'm in, because there's probably some cooler thing that I could be doing. My head tells me to get loaded. My thinking tells me that nobody sees me the way that I want to be seen, and that I have a right to being seen the way that I want to be seen, and I need to go in and put my hands in it and control and manipulate the way that they see me. These are the types of things that my thinking tells me. And so it's not really safe for me to be thinking my own thoughts. So what am I going to think instead? I was told to say thy will be done constantly in my own head instead of thinking my own thoughts. So just this constant thought of thy will be done is like running in my head. And at first it was just this thing I said because I was told to say it in my head, and I was completely willing to follow direction because I could see that my way had not worked up to this point. And it grew into an understanding that everything that's happening is happening according to my higher power's will. It's not my business to get involved with it. What is my business is how I'm going to turn my life over. And that's by following direction. Now, if you can follow direction, you can stay sober, because the direction that's outlined in the first 164 pages of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is perfectly designed to get me tapped into a power greater than myself. And that power is going to do all the rest. So it's very clear that this higher power is very important in this program. It is a very important part of this program. It is the whole program. But it doesn't matter what I conceive that power to be. And I will tell you all, if you're new, we actually have concrete evidence that this power does not care what you think it is. And the evidence is that if this power cared what you thought it was, this program would only work for the chosen few who conceived of or thought of this higher power in the right way. But it doesn't. It works equally for all of us. So I was encouraged strongly to not be too worried or concerned about what is this power? Can I draw it on a piece of paper? Can I write its attributes? But what am I going to do to build a relationship with it? Now, to build a relationship with this power, what I need is a channel that's clear between me and this higher power. I need to be able to speak to this power. And this is where, I get into the fourth step. And the fourth step is all about clearing away what is blocking me and a higher power. So I'm going to give you all it is a metaphor. This is like a conceptualization of a higher power. I'm not telling you that like this is my higher power, but when I talk about 4 and 10 and like why the steps are important to stop getting loaded, because that might not seem obvious if you're new, like what do these steps have to do with the fact that I can't stop drinking? Or I can't stay stopped from drinking. This metaphor I think is helpful, but like, once again, it's just a metaphor. This isn't like some literal thing necessarily. Okay. So there is a tunnel, and through that tunnel streams golden light. Now that light is completely neutral. Like it doesn't have thoughts or feelings or opinions. Like it's not moving away or towards the tunnel. It's just there. And its function is that it streams through this tunnel. Now, in the tunnel is all this debris. This is how I come in. When I'm placed on a 4-step, all this debris is between the light and me. So that light cannot shine through. It is completely blocked by all of this debris. Now, the process of the steps is all about clearing that debris out of the tunnel so that that light can shine through. And so when that light shines through, in this metaphor, the plants can grow, and I need those plants to grow to live. Now, here's the sneaky little part of it. My alcoholism thinks that we are growing mushrooms. And so it is actively trying to block the tunnel so that the darkness comes and those mushrooms grow. But if the mushrooms grow, we die. If the plants grow, we live. So we need that light. So what the steps are designed to do is to clear. I do a lot of this motion, so this is happening a lot. This is going to be recorded, so I'll say I'm moving my hands in like a little like terrier kind of a thing. So we need to move that debris out of the tunnel, because only when the light shines through am I able to live. And if the light does not shine through, I die. And there is a part of me that is actively trying to build up debris. And thus we arrive at the 4-step and then later the 10th step, because the point of the 4-step is to get that first big, thing, all that debris from the past out between me and a higher power. But because that sneaky little alcoholism is always trying to continue to block that tunnel, I need step 10, which is where we continued to take inventory and made right things that went wrong, not from the past, but currently going on. That's why I need that step to keep that channel clear. Because if I don't have a clear channel between me and a higher power, whatever I believe that higher power to be, I'm not going to make it. Because the second that debris fills up and there's no connection between me and a higher power, I am going to get loaded again. Period. Because sobriety is not about this idea that I'm just not going to drink. That drives me nuts. People say, just don't drink. If I knew how to just don't drink, I would be out there in the world just don't drinking. I don't have the capacity for that, because for me, of myself naturally, I don't feel okay and I need to get out of myself some way. And so what we create in sobriety is a life that we don't need to escape from. We have no need or desire to escape from. And we do that through the implementation of these spiritual principles. First, that we learn in step 4, and then that we continue to practice through the rest of the steps, but with, the special focus on step 10. Okay, so I'm going to kind of get into it now. I've set the stage for the first 20 minutes, and now we'll start talking about these steps. So, step 4 talks about how we're going to take inventory. And so I'm going to look at these things, these causes and conditions of why I got loaded. Now, I hear a lot of confusion from people about what makes them an alcoholic. And you've probably heard someone say at some point, I was born an alcoholic. Now, here's the thing. Here's my take on it. And this is all just my take. I'm not here. I don't speak for AA, that's for sure. My take on it is that I was born selfish and self-centered. I was born with these tendencies, with this need to be seen a certain way, with this need to make the world the way that I wanted it to be, which is that third component of alcoholism. So first is the phenomenon of craving, second, the mental obsession, and the third is that selfishness and self-centeredness, the spiritual malady. So I was born with that. I have been acting out of that since I was conscious of existing. But I wasn't born an alcoholic, because to be an alcoholic means all three components. And I didn't start to experience the phenomenon of craving and the mental obsession until I activated my disease by getting loaded. So the question of like, is it self that makes me an alcoholic, or is it alcohol that makes me an alcoholic? It's the relationship between them that makes me an alcoholic. Because here's the thing, normal people, they get in trouble with alcohol all the time. Happens all the time to normal people who do not have alcoholism. But what they do when they start to notice there's a problem is they pull back. They say, oh, this is getting way out of hand. I'm not going to do that anymore. And they stop or they moderate. Now, for me, as an alcoholic, when I noticed things started to go really bad, there was the big reason that I couldn't stop was that when you take the substance away from me, I don't feel okay. I feel restless, irritable, and discontented. And so I am reaching for that sense of ease and comfort that comes to me from getting loaded. And so I can't just stay sober on my own because I don't feel okay on my own. Now, a normal person, they might feel okay on their own. So they may need some help. They may even need to go to rehab, get a little therapy, change of environment, whatever it is. And they're able to do that. But for me, there's nowhere you can put me where the problem's gone because I take me everywhere I go. So I don't feel okay naturally. So when we look at the 4-step, what we look at is the causes and conditions of me, of why I got loaded the way that I did. And the reason that I got loaded the way that I did is because I am dominated by resentment. I am dominated by fear. I am dominated by the things that others have done to me, my poor reactions to them, and then the other harmful things that I did to others. I am dominated by those things. And so that is what we get to take a look at in the 4th step. So I'll start by talking about resentment, because that is where it starts in the book. And so for me, if I just define resentment as anger, I'm going to miss some stuff. Because for me, resentment is resentment. So if we look at that word, what it's talking about is it's talking about reliving feelings or thoughts that I have, where I'm always playing them over and over in my head and I'm bringing them back. And so often that happens with anger, but I can do that with anything that just rubs me the wrong way. And I'm thinking about it over and over and over again, and I can't recycle it and I can't stop thinking about it. That's resentment. And the big book says that I can't just wish that away any more than alcohol. It gives me this very concrete, like idea of why I can't live with resentment, because what it says is that when I'm living in resentment, I block out the sunlight of the spirit. Thus my little metaphor, you see, golden light, sunlight of the spirit. So I'm blocking that out. When I have resentment, there's no room for a higher power when I'm full of resentment. So it says that's why it's necessary to get rid of it. But then it says, I can't wish that away any more than alcohol. It says, I can't wish that any more than I could wish away selfishness. It requires me to take action. And then it goes into the description of the solution to resentment. And so here I'm going to focus a little bit less on like literally like writing out a 4th and a 10th inventory. I'm going to focus more on the spiritual principles that are solutions to the things that I'm going to be bringing up, that we bring up when we do inventory. So the solution to resentment in one word is tolerance. So my willingness to see myself in what other people have done or are doing is my solution to resentment that I carry with me today. So I will talk a little bit about the kind of stuff that I did write on my inventory. Now, some of the things that I resented people for were things that people had done that were pretty harmful. I've been sexually assaulted. I was sexually assaulted at a young age, sexually assaulted pretty much, periodically throughout the rest of my life. And so it's this question of, okay, well, what's my part in that? Because that's the real solution that we start to look at, is we look at our part in these resentments. Now, I have 4 ways of looking at my part. First one that I look at is, did I do something to literally cause the thing that person did? The second is, did I ever do anything that harmed that person, regardless of that specific incident? Did I ever do anything that harmed that person? And then the next thing I'm going to look at is, have I ever done that thing in any form whatsoever? Not about scale, Not about did I do the exact thing, but anything like it ever to anybody else. And then the fourth thing that I'm going to look at is, did I use the thing that that person did as an excuse to treat somebody else poorly, to cause harm in any other form in my life? And so when I look at those four ways that it could be my part, I always have a part. And I will tell you, especially when it comes to things like sexual assault or violence or anything like that, nobody ever has a reason to do something like that to another person. There is absolutely no excuse in the world for something like that. But what I could take a look at was how I took those things that people did to me and I weaponized them against other people. And I caused trauma and I caused harm with this excuse of, don't you know what happened to me? And I will tell you that when I was able to look at that, part that I had in the things that people had done to me, I started to become free of them. That domination, the way that those things had been my master and had absolutely dictated the way that I acted the rest of my life, I started to become free of them. And that was the greatest gift that I ever got. And I know, it's like, the fourth step, it's so scary. I tell people it is the greatest gift I ever got. Because I'll tell you, I've been in trauma therapy since I was a wee one, like all kinds of stuff these therapists all did with me. And it never did anything. It was never helpful at all. But that was the most helpful thing in the world, because I may never have sexually assaulted anyone, but I can tell you things that I did do. I wasn't the greatest respecter of consent. God forbid somebody wasn't attracted to me, because that hit at the heart of who I was, and I would chase them and I would pursue them. And, it's not about scale. It's not about saying like, oh, well, that's just as bad as sexual assault, but I could see myself in the behavior. I could see myself in the ways that I had taken, things from other people so that I could feel powerful or so I could feel good. And so it's like, okay, wow, I can see myself in that. And then, I was mad at my pimp. He used to beat me up. Guess what? I used to beat up my ex-girlfriend. Like, damn, all right, well, let's let go of it then. What am I holding on to it for if I can see myself in it, if I've done those similar things? And then, another hard one was I was held captive in my apartment for 3 months by a meth dealer. And my biggest resentment was he made me feel so afraid. I felt fear all the time. I felt fear every day. Guess what I did to my parents living the way that I lived? They were afraid every single day. Both of my parents have trauma responses to what I put them through with the way that I was living. So damn, I guess I've made somebody live in fear as well. I can see myself in it. Now I'm free. Now I can move forward with it. And then today, what we're asked to do with resentment is when it comes up, we're asked to see ourselves in it. Can I see that this is a sick person too? God saved me from being angry. So what's most important with resentment is that it's not that I turn to myself and say, oh, wow, this resentment is silly and it's stupid and it's cutting me off from the sunlight of the spirit. I better get rid of it real quick, like some self-will thing. It's that I'm going to immediately turn it to this power. I'm going to ask in prayer for my higher power to remove that and to draw my attention to how I can be helpful in the situation. And I will tell you that a lot of times what it looks like to be helpful to somebody you resent is get away. Go away from them. Like, you don't need to get all up in their business. But sometimes it's like, okay, maybe I can do something concrete. And okay, I'm going to go be helpful. So then the next thing that we look at is fear. Now, I was very dominated by fear. My greatest fear when I was getting loaded was that I was going to run out, and I wasn't going to be as loaded as I wanted to be. Like, that was my big fear. And so once I get sober, what do my fears look like? I am so afraid, cripplingly afraid, that you won't see me the way that I want to be seen. That is the thing that I am most afraid of in this world. And that is a very selfish fear. But I'm here to make the very radical proposition that all fear is selfish. Because when I'm afraid of something, it's because I have this specific outcome in mind. I have the way that I have thought I want it to be, and I'm afraid it's not going to be the way that I want it to be. Now, when we apply that towards like, hey, I'm afraid that something could happen to my family member and I want them to be safe and healthy and happy, it might not seem so selfish, but still in my mind, I'm saying, well, I have this outcome in mind of the way that I want it to be, the way that I think it should be, when what I know is that my higher power's will is happening. And I trust in my higher power's will. I trust that things happen according to my higher power's will is the way that they're supposed to happen. So it's not really my business to get in there with fear and to like be like, well, this is how I think it should be. But what I will say about fear is that I've found this crazy phenomenon that is described in the big book as well, where when I'm afraid of something, if I act out in trying to make it not happen because I'm afraid it's going to happen, and I try to put my hands in it to try to avoid the outcome that I'm afraid will happen, I always bring that thing so much closer to me. So in my early sobriety, I was afraid that people wouldn't see me as somebody who was doing this program, because that was what was really valued. It's like everybody in my home group was like, okay, you got to be helpful, like you got to be spiritual, like all this stuff. And so I was afraid that people wouldn't see me as helpful or spiritual. Never once did it occur to me that I could just go be helpful or go be spiritual and people would see me that way. No, 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 no. I need to manage and control it. I need to make sure that they see me as helpful and spiritual. And I did a lot of very odd things in that desire where, I was out there and I was trying to be helpful, but I was telling everybody, you need to do this or you're going to die. And I was all intense and weird and people did not like it. You probably see how intense I am right now. This was like a whole nother level of intensity. People didn't like it. We got kicked out of treatment centers. And I absolutely guaranteed that no one saw me as helpful or spiritual because I wasn't helpful or spiritual. So that thing that I was afraid of, I absolutely made sure that it happened because I was acting out of fear. Now, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous offers us a different way, a new way of dealing with fear. And it gives us a promise. It's also a threat. Most of the promises are also threats, if I'm honest, but okay. It says, just to the extent that we do as we think our higher power would have us and humbly rely on them, are we enabled to match calamity with serenity. So here's the thing. There is no promise that your higher power is going to make sure that the thing you're afraid of doesn't happen. There's no guarantee of that. But there is a guarantee and a promise that just to the extent that I'm doing what my higher power would have me and humbly relying on that power, that when that thing I'm afraid of does come, that I'll be able to walk through it sane and sober, that I'll be able to meet it successfully. And I have evidence of that. I've seen it. I know multiple people who have had their child die in sobriety and they remain sober through it. And I personally can't imagine a worse thing that could ever happen to anybody. I just can't think of anything that could be worse than that. And these people walked through that sane and sober. And so when I hear somebody, little time of sobriety and it's like, why'd you go out? Why'd you go get loaded after a couple months? And they're like, well, my girlfriend broke up with me and that's why I got loaded. It's like, is it really? Is that why? Or is it that there was an issue with the extent to which, you were doing what your higher power would have you and humbly relying on them? Because I believe in this promise that I'm going to stay sober based on my willingness to continue to do my higher power's will. That's what I believe. And so for me personally, when I'm in fear, it's not this question of like, okay, well, let's make sure that thing doesn't happen. But let me take a look at the extent to which I'm doing as my higher power would have me. How well am I following the direction that I was given from this book, from a sponsor? How well am I practicing these principles in all my affairs? And how well am I keeping my hands out of my own life and letting things be as they're going to be, only attending to the roles that I was assigned and not the little roles that I made up for myself that I thought were mine, but they really weren't. How well am I doing that? So when fear comes up, I ask my higher power to direct my attention to what they would have me be. And then I take a little inventory of how well I'm doing what my higher power would have me. The only reason that in those moments where I ask what my higher power would have me be, do I get answers to that question is because I read the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous a lot, and the answers are all in there. So I highly recommend reading the book a lot because the answers are all in there. So then we're brought to this question of the sex conduct. Woo, woo, woo. And there is a paragraph in the Big Book. This is one of my favorites. I'm actually just going to read it for you all because why not? Let's just get right to it. I could paraphrase it, but who knows how well that would go. So this is on page 70. And it says, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. Now, you can put anything else in that paragraph. You can say, to sum up about sex, to sum up about gambling, to sum up about money, to sum up about body image, to sum up about codependency, literally anything else that you might deal with here in this program. This like step-by-step solution can be applied to it. And that's where personally, I have not found it necessary to work other 12-step programs, even though I do identify as being beyond the power of choice with certain things in my sex life, with, certain, behaviors. I haven't needed to do another 12-step program because this is very, very effective. Because I started acting out in weird sex behavior from when I was 3 years old. So this for me goes way back, goes farther than getting loaded ever did. And so I'm going to need a comprehensive solution to deal with this, just like I needed a comprehensive solution to getting loaded, because this is my day one. This is what I'm going to go back to when I need relief, when I need to get out of myself. Like I'm always going to default into the sex behavior. But I can tell you that from my own personal experience, this direction covers it. This direction has been sufficient for me to deal with that and to have an absolute transformation in the way that I relate to my sexual behavior. So first, I'm praying for the right ideal. So that's kind of like a broad thing. So I'm praying for the right ideal. Then for guidance in each questionable situation. So right now, like this thing that I'm dealing with right now, what's the guidance for that? As well as like this greater ideal of what I should be doing generally. Then for sanity, and what's important about that is that I'm reminding myself that I'm insane. So I've been insane. So we're going to remind ourselves of that. And that's very helpful for me to know that it's not normal the way that I relate to these things. And for the strength to do the right thing. So once again, this power doesn't have to come from within me to be this perfect saint. Oh, I just don't do anything weird in my sex life anymore because I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not my experience. That power doesn't come from within me. That power comes from a power greater than myself. That if I've taken this inventory and I have cleared that debris away, I have a clear channel to. So that strength is going to be given to me based on my willingness to ask for it. It doesn't just come naturally. I need to go and seek that strength and those answers to how I should be acting. And then, very simple. It says, go help others more. Go be more helpful to other alcoholics. And my experience is that has saved me. I will tell you all that if I hadn't been given the direction to go and be helpful to other alcoholics from the third step, because it was made very simple that what's my higher power's will for me, it was to go and be helpful to others. So I better start doing that right away on the third step. If I hadn't started doing that in a third step, I don't know how I would have gotten through writing my 4-step inventory. It's very important for me to already be in a practice of helping other alcoholics, getting out of myself. Because when you write all of these things out, these really like ugly, shameful things, it's very important that we're helping other alcoholics during that, because I need to get out of myself and I'm not going to go get loaded. I'm not going to go cause more harm. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go be helpful to other alcoholics. And that's very simple. Like, hey, we're going to read the book together, or we're going to just share our experience. We're going to talk to each other. It's not like I got to say the thing that's going to get them sober, but I'm just trying to be in this practice of helping other alcoholics. And, some of the things that I looked at on a 4-step are the things that I'm left with today, like these thinking patterns, and getting to look at these broad thinking patterns was very, very helpful to me, because here's the way that I think naturally of myself. And this is all so like I should be in jail for these thoughts, it's so crazy that I think this way, but this is how my mind thinks because I'm so deeply selfish. So I had a friend, and her and I were in rehab together. And they moved her to another facility because she was like moving on to the next facility. And I was going to stay on in a facility that was like closer by to the rehab that we went through. And I thought to myself, God, I hope she gets loaded, because then they'll move her back and then we can be friends again. Now, I don't want that. I don't want her to get loaded, but that's just how my head thinks because I'm so deeply selfish. And these were the things that were really helpful for me to take a look at in my 4-step, because it can seem like, wow, I don't ever want to admit to anybody that I think that way. But only through acknowledging and taking a look at the fact that I continue to think this way is the way that I get any relief from it, is the way that I get guided towards something greater. And that brings us to the 10th step of what I'm going to do now. How am I going to continue to put these principles that I've been taught into action on a daily basis in my continuing recovery? Because that sneaky little alcoholism is trying to grow mushrooms. So it's trying to block that light out. So we have darkness. So debris continues to build up in the tunnel, in the channel between me and a higher power. So I'm going to need to continue to take inventory And when I continue to harm others, I need to have a process to make that right. Because if enough debris comes between me and a higher power, I'm going to get loaded. That's just a fact. That's what it means to be powerless over alcohol. So without a higher power, I will get loaded again, whether I want to or not. So let's look at what it says when it comes to a 10th step. So I'm just going to read just a couple portions. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it says that our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So I'm meant to carry these principles that I was taught all through the book up to this point and after into my continuing life. And then it says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. That should sound pretty familiar to you from what we read in the 4th step, from those spiritual principles we're taught to deal with resentment and with fear. So it all goes together, very well. It's just a continuation of that. So when these things come up, and it doesn't say if, it says when, because resentment, fear, selfishness, dishonesty, that's who I am of myself. That's just who I am. And that's not a judgment statement. I'm not passing judgment on myself. Like, that's not to be down, on me. It's just a fact. That's just how I am. Completely matter of fact. So when these things come up, what am I going to do? Well, same thing as always. I'm going to turn to a power greater than myself, not to myself to just self-will. Oh, I've got to be a saint now. No, I'm going to turn to a higher power, ask for the removal of that thing. I'm going to share it with somebody else, because the 4th step goes into the 5th step where we share that entire moral inventory with another person. Now, the 10th step also has a continuation of the 5th step, where when something needs to come up, we share it with another person. Now, I personally tell my sponsor everything. I am not here to say that you have to do that. It's not necessarily part of the program. People are like, oh, you should have like intuitive thinking. I need another set of peepers on all the stuff that I got going on, because I am liable to do some very harmful things to others when I'm not taking a good look at it. So I just like to have another person's eyes on it, like what's going on. And that way, when something does go down, I'm not catching her up on all the lore. She already knows what's going on because I've been telling her what's happening. So I tell my sponsor everything. And anything in my head that comes up where it's like, maybe I shouldn't tell my sponsor that. Okay, that we're going to share first. That's coming out right away, because all that sneakiness is just, it's not appropriate. I can't live like that. And so then, just like it said in that Now About Sex, then I'm going to turn my attention to how I can be helpful to another person. All of the steps are about the way that I can be helpful to somebody else. So when I have a clear channel between me and a higher power, that's when I'm most effective and most helpful to another person. But being helpful to another person also helps me keep that channel clear. So the process of inventory, prayer and meditation, and being helpful, bringing a spirit of service into the things that I do in my everyday life, as well as having a consistent practice of being helpful to other alcoholics in a program of Alcoholics Anonymous, are all of like the excavation tools that are keeping this debris out of the tunnel so that I can have a clear channel between me and a higher power. So they all work together. It's not like, oh, I have to have a perfectly clear channel before I can go be helpful to somebody else. That is part of the way that I keep that channel clear. It's by having a consistent practice of being helpful. Now, we hear a lot about the 9th step promises. They're like the prettiest girl at the dance. But there are other promises all throughout the book. And there are 10th step promises. What the 10th step promises have to do with is the fact that I will have the mental obsession of getting loaded removed. I will no longer want to get loaded. Now, it's connected with the 10th step. I do know people who have to do a 10th step consistently for a long period of time before that happens. So it's not like the first time that you're done with 9 and you're practicing principles and you're like, oh, it's gone. It was my experience that it was gone very quickly. But I'll tell you what it looks like in practice to have that obsession removed. Does not mean that I never think about getting loaded. I'll tell you all that I think about getting loaded every day because I'm in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I talk about my experience getting loaded every day. So I think about it quite a bit, but I'm thinking about it with no desire to get loaded, no feeling of, oh, I'd really like to do that, or oh, that sounds great, or oh, I really want to. No, it's just like a thought of like, oh, getting loaded is something that I used to do all the time, like blah, blah, blah. But it's just, there's no heat behind it. There's no desire. There's no pull. I can be around people who are getting loaded. I'm in college right now, and people are out here getting loaded, let me tell you, like it's happening, and I get invited out to stuff, and, it's like, oh, Madeline doesn't drink, like, no, I'm good. And it's no problem. I can move easily in and through a world where people get loaded without any difficulty, because I continue to take this inventory and make things right when things go wrong. That is why I am able to move freely through the world. If I stop doing that, I am fully convinced that desire would come back. And so I keep a very consistent and strong practice of keeping this inventory. Now, there's a lot of kind of debate and confusion about what's step 10 and what's step 11, where when people hear, like, oh, I'm writing on a 10 step. Very technically, not that it matters at all. The 10th step is what I'm doing as I go throughout my day to practice these principles and to make things right as they go wrong. So I'm taking inventory in the moment. So a selfish thought comes up and it's like, okay, I asked for that to be removed. That's the type of inventory talked about in step 10. That written inventory I do at the end of the night is technically part of step 11. It doesn't matter at all. Call it whatever you want. It's all good. But just the 10th step is me practicing these principles, this kind of step process where it says I ask for it to be removed, I turn it to a higher power, then I, share it with somebody else. And then that is technically what step 10 is about. And it's like, okay, so I'm asking for it to be removed, but what are we replacing it with? And it talks about tolerance. It talks about understanding. It says love and tolerance of others is our code. So that's what I'm asked to be practicing here and now today. And I'll just tell you how I define love and tolerance and why they're so important to this continuation of taking inventory. So, like I said, tolerance is my willingness and my ability to see myself in what's going on. So when that stuff comes up where I'm all rankled by it, it's like, all right, can I see myself in it? And then whoosh, it's gone. And then love is my willingness to do what is actually best for another person. Not the thing that I would do for them or what I want or what I think about it, but what's truly best for them. And what that looks like in practice in this program is that I tell people the truth. I tell other alcoholics the truth about their situation, because alcoholics come in and it's my instinct. It's my selfish instinct to, pat them on the back and say, everything's fine. You're safe now. Everything's going to be okay. The truth is it might not be okay. If you're an alcoholic and you don't do this program, you're probably going to die. And I'm not saying that as an extremist, that's just a fact. You probably will die. And it is very unfair and unloving for me to go to somebody who might die without this and make it seem like there's all these options. Oh, you can do whatever you want. It'll probably be fine. I'm alive today because women told me how important it was that I did this program and that I built a foundation. And so it is my responsibility to carry that on. Now, it's not my responsibility to control and manipulate and try to make them do this. You got to do this. It's nothing like that. I just have to share with them the true information that alcoholics often die without this program. They may be the exception. I don't know, but I've got to let them know what the odds are. I got to give them that accurate information. And then another kind of resulting promise of the 10th step, and I'll just end by talking about this, is this kind of intuitive thinking that comes, is that when situations come up, I am given this information because I have a clear channel between me and a higher power. This power flows in and through me, and I'm able to meet situations successfully in a way I had never been able to before. And I have that experience. The things that I do on a daily basis today are just not how I would have reacted to them before. I'm in college and I'm at, a pretty high level institution. And, it's I need a tutor for one of my classes. It's I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend extra time on this physics class. I don't want to deal with that. That's hard. But it's this intuitive thinking of okay, wow, I need help with this. I can't do it on my own. I'm going to go ask for help and I'm going to do it. And that's what it looks like in my daily lived experience. And then the other thing that it looks like is that when I get asked to do something for Alcoholics Anonymous, I say yes, and I do it. When a woman calls me, and I'll tell you, I hate talking on the phone. I really don't like it. It makes me very uncomfortable. But when somebody calls me and I don't want to call them back because I don't know what we're going to talk about, I call them back and I talk to them and we have beautiful conversations and we talk about our lives and we talk about this program and we talk about the solution and I listen to them. I will tell you that the greatest intuitive thinking that does not come from within me, proof of a higher power, is that I can listen to what somebody else says today. Because I love to talk. If you get nothing else out of what I've just done for the last 50 minutes, I love to talk. So, I can talk forever, but can I listen? Can I truly listen to what another person has to say? And that is the type of intuitive thinking that flows in and through me based on my willingness to, in the first place, take that inventory in step 4 and really take a look at the things that I've done in the past. And then admit with full humility in step 10 that that is still who I am. That I'm not struck saint, I'm not struck sober, I'm not struck perfect. I'm going to continue to deal with those things that are of who I am and continue to take a look at them and have a willingness and a humility in the moment when my very selfish thoughts come up, when my perfectionism comes up, when my fear comes up, when my resentment comes up, when my dishonesty comes up. Am I willing to turn it to a higher power, to admit that it's happening, turn it to a higher power, and take the action that's presented of me to go and make it right? And, I had this one example where, I love to tell people things, whether I know they're true or not. I'm not lying. I just don't know for sure whether it's true. And I just will say it. And I have this experience in sobriety of having to go back to people and say, hey, I don't know why I said that. I do not know that that's true. And actually, I looked it up and it's not true. And I'm so sorry I told you that. And that is the most humbling thing I have ever done in sobriety. I will just keep it real. That is the most humbling thing I've ever done in sobriety. The power to do that doesn't come from within me. But those are the types of things that I've been able to do through this, through the process of these steps. So I love steps 4 and 10. I think that they're kissing. I think that they love each other. I think that they're best friends. And so I'm so glad that I had this opportunity today to tell you all about their special relationship with each other and how they work in and through me in my life today. So thank you all so much for letting me speak to you.